My name's Mike, and I'd like to talk to you for just 10 minutes or so about poetry. Don't switch off. Poetry. I'd like to get to the bottom of what is poetry. Is it important? Are we all poets? What does it mean? Because as you go through school, and certainly as you get up to sort of GCSE and beyond, studying poetry can become, people can get very scientific and technical about poetry with Shakespeare and iambic pentameter and stressed syllables and unstressed and tetrameter people can easily get very technical, but I don't want to do that because there'll be people sleeping already. What I do want to talk about though is that there are levels, gradations of how seriously you want to take your poetry. And as I say, you can almost look at it scientifically, because it's a bit like if you pick up a guitar. If I pick up a guitar now, I can't play it. I have to learn chords and I have to learn things. And similarly with poetry, there are things you can learn and need to learn if you really want to take poetry very seriously. There's also, of course, there's poetry that we're all involved in, with Mother's Day cards, Valentine's Day cards, Christmas cards, birthday cards. We're all exposed to poetry because it's in our everyday lives, isn't it? Not only that, but we're a society, we're a world, of a global world of consumers, and people are always selling you things. They're always selling you things. Right now, after talking to you on my phone like this and filming this, my phone will be absorbing everything I'm saying, and pretty soon I'll probably get on my Facebook feed, I'll get adverts saying, poetry, want to sell this, want to buy this, and they'll be selling me it because we're consumers. We're at the mercy of people who are selling us things. And just to link that back to poetry again, I've noticed in the last 10 or 20 years that poetry has been used a lot by advertisers. McDonald's have used poetry. Adidas have used poetry. Adidas, I don't even know how you say it. Halifax, Sprite, Levi's. Lionel Messi's been, I've seen his, a video of Lionel Messi put to poetry. It's fantastic, isn't it? And so, we are steeped in poetry. But let's have a look at, as I say, in the older days, right, going back a good few years, poetry was very technical, and people who were poets to the court of the king or whatever used to have to write these particular types of poems. In fact, thinking of the death of Prince Philip that we've just had, the poet laureate is a man called Simon Armitage. He wrote an elegy, which is a specific type of poem, to Prince Philip, because that's his job as the poet laureate. You have to write these poems for serious and royal occasions and stuff. There we are. So, but poetry, let's talk about it. And I first got involved because what happens is you can get there's all sorts of different types of poetry. As I say, elegies, there's villanelles, there's sonnets, there's all sorts, there's haiku, there's all sorts, there's loads of different types of poetry that take particular rhyming schemes and stressed and unstressed syllables. Shakespeare, for example, very famous for iambic pentameter, which is de-dum, 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 de-dum. There's a certain way that the language goes. In fact, let's read you a bit of Shakespeare, right? Shakespeare, Henry V, because I'm going to read you two poets. I first fell in love with poetry when I came across a man called Wilfrid Owen, who only 100 years ago was the First World War, just over 100 years ago now, and my granddad was in the First World War, and there was a man in the First World War who died just a few weeks before it was all over, but this wonderful man called Wilfrid Owen, who wrote poems about the First World War. And what was really good about that was, he wrote these poems saying, war's a pretty terrible thing, because if you know I don't know if you do know anything about the First World War, but it was trench warfare. So there's these rat and lice infected trenches that people had to stand in, and then they'd blow a whistle and they'd all have to go up and charge at the other side, Germans against the British, as it were, and they'd charge again and they all get shot. In fact, they recruited big posters recruiting people, come fight for your country. It's a wonderful thing to fight and die for your country. So all these people, young people go, yeah, all right, I'll join up. And they go up and they get over there. And this happened with one Accrington Pals regiment from near Manchester. 700 people signed up. They all went over. They all went over to France to fight the Germans. And 500 of them just died on the first day because the whistle was blown. They all charged over the top and they all died. And people go, oh, what was the point of that? So this man, I'll just read you a little bit of this, right? This is called Dulcia Decorum Est, which is really about, is it a great and noble, the whole poem is is it a great and noble thing to die for your country? And Wilfrid Owen really, and other poets as well at that time, opened people's eyes and thought, whoa, hang on a minute. And his use of language, that's what's important in poetry, is bent double like old beggars under sacks, knock-kneed, coughing like hags, we cursed through sludge, till on the haunting flares we turned our backs, and towards our distant rest began to trudge. Men marched asleep, many had lost their boots, but limped on, bloodshod. All went lame, all blind, drunk with fatigue, deaf even to the hoots of tired, outstripped 5-9s that dropped behind. Gas! Gas! Quick, boys! I won't read it all, but it's just a wonderful, colourful picture of the horror of war, the horror, and his use, you know, bent double like old beggars under sacks. I remember when I first came in contact as a young, but maybe, I don't know how old you are, but, you know, in early secondary school, and I came across Wilfrid Owen, and I was just like, wow. But also you can come across things like this. So that's the horror of war, but then you can get the other side of war, which is Shakespeare in Henry V, where he says, come on! Like, it's a bit like the Welsh rugby team as going over the top, and so he's like, in Henry V, he goes, once more unto the breach, dear friends, once more, or close the wall up with our English dead. In peace, there's nothing so becomes a man as modest stillness and humility. But when the blast of war blows in our ears, then imitate the action of the tiger. Stiffen the sinews, summon up the blood, disguise fair nature with hard-favoured rage. Then lend the eye a terrible aspect. Let pry through the portage of the head, like the brass cannon, let the brow overwhelm it. Wow, I'll stop there, but can you see the difference? Two poets, Shakespeare and Wilfrid Owen, one saying, this is awful, this war, bent double like old beggars over sack, yeah? And then the other one, once more unto the breach, right? Stiffen the sinews, disguise like a tiger, right? It's fantastic, isn't it? That you've got one who's... But what is great is for us is to talk about poetry, okay? Because poetry expresses it all. It's using language carefully. It's you can't... It takes... There was a writer called Kingsley Amis who said, writing a poem, you can write a poem in a couple of hours, right? But if you write a novel, a story, right, that can take you months. So you can spend, if you write a useless novel or a useless poem, at least if you write a useless poem, it just takes you a couple of hours, chuck it away and say, oh, that's a load of old nonsense. But if you write a useless novel, that can take you a year, you know, or more sometimes. And that's a lot of your life, isn't it? That's why poetry is so wonderful in some ways, that you can write these short little pieces that really convey such power, like the two I've read you about war. And I want to read you one actually that, and I know what you're going to say. But look, see this one. This is a book of mine. Sorry, but I just want to tell you about this because to take it completely away from war, it's called A Wee Bit of Trouble. And I have to tell you that I was in a school in Swansea, primary school, and the teacher, I was there to do some work with the whole school, and the head teacher or deputy head teacher said to the whole school assembly, we're very lucky today because we've got Mike and he's going to talk about poetry, and I like his book because it's got custard on the front. Now you can see this, that A Wee Bit of Trouble, when you spell the word wee with 2 E's, that yellow is not custard. So I had to whisper to her, even in front of 400 kids. I said, Miss, that's not custard. If you look at the spelling of the word we, it's got 2 E's. At which point she then turned to me and went, ugh. So with disgust and horror, which is also what this poem's all about, because the title poem of A Wee Bit of Trouble is actually about what happened to me when I was on my first day of school. I was 4 or something like that, 4 years old. And at 4 years old, you believe anything. So when my brother and sister said to me, "Mike, you're going to big school tomorrow, aren't you?" And I was like, "Yeah." Said, "Well, watch out for Mrs. Grimwood, the deputy head teacher." She was a real lady, by the way. Grimwood, what a name. And she said, "Watch out for Mrs. Grimwood because she eats small children on their first day at school." Now, if you say that to a 4-year-old, they believe it. I believed it. I didn't want to go to school, right? I was scared. And then when I got to school, I had to sit. I went to class, met me coat hook first, which is your best friend, isn't it, for a while. And then the teacher said, lovely lady, Mrs. Keir, she said, "Right, children, you've all met your coat hook and the rest of the class. Now we're going to assembly." To which I was like, a little alarm bell went off and I was like, oh no, Mrs. Grimwood, right? And because my brother and sister told me that she eats small children and I thought she was going to eat me. So when I got to assembly, I was sat at the front in my little shorts and this woman came in, all went quiet, and this woman came in who was like tough and looked like she was once more unto the breach, actually. And she came in and she stormed towards the piano, and when she sat by the piano she was looking at the whole school, looking for someone who's picking their nose or doing something wrong. And she'd looked at me already. She'd come in and I was like terrified. I thought, oh no, she's going to eat me first. So when she was playing piano, I had a little accident, which is you do when you're 4, don't you? And I had a little accident on the floor, and she stopped playing the piano, stopped everything, and pulled me out in front of the whole school and gave me a real telling off, you know. I suppose in some way she was probably just showing the new children in the school, don't mess with teachers, right? But it messed with my head until I wrote this poem that sort of exacted some revenge. And I got to read it on the BBC once, and when I read it, you know, I thought, revenge at last. No, I didn't think that. But anyway, it goes like this. It's called A Wee Bit of Trouble. I'm sure you all had a teacher like Mrs. Grimwood, who should not have taught, but fought for her country. Picture now school assembly, varnished bottoms on varnished floors, and teachers guarding all the doors, as Mrs. Grimwood bashed out all things bright and beautiful, while I sat there, bursting to go, but trying to slow my bladder's urge. Then a surge, I couldn't wait, too late. I did a wee into my grey shorts and beyond, an unstoppable pond, and as the puddle grew and children knew, I became a little island of guilt, as they built a moat around me, until Mrs. G could see, and amidst clouds of steam and tears, all my worst fears came true. "You," she cried, "the worst of teachers for all creatures great and small." I had to stand in front of the whole school, a weak-bladdered fool. "And let this be a lesson to all. Do not come into the hall needing the toilet, or you'll spoil it for everyone else." This episode has had a profound effect on my life, as my wife now locks the wardrobe each night, or I'm a sad sight, crouching in there for the loo, as she says with a love so true, "Mrs. Grimwood's not watching you." But she is. Always. There we are, that's my poem called A Wee Bit of Trouble. So I've given you 3 poems today, a bit of Shakespeare, a bit of Wilfrid Owen, and a bit of A Wee Bit of Trouble. But actually, my point is, poems can gird the loins for war. They can actually be a crusade against war and say what a terrible thing war is. Or it can just be a memory of someone who should have gone to war rather than teach in a school. It can be a memory of someone like that. And that's what my poem is. So what I'd say to you is poetry is absolutely fantastic. You can watch how people use words and play with words, create images, create pictures in your head, and you can do fantastic things with poetry. You can take it to a real technical level that we talked about, you know, the beats and the you know, the syllables, etc. You can study it scientifically, and should if you really want to get into poetry. But it's there for all of us to enjoy and and really try and understand. Some poems are easy to understand, some you have to work a bit harder. Why not? Anyway, I'll leave you with that, some thoughts on poetry. Have a look at some yourself and see what you think. Ta-da!